Hi there, it's Mark, and welcome to book-ramble. This is another tag. And this one, as soon as I saw it, I just wanted to do it immediately. It's from a channel that's quickly becoming, if not already, one of my favourites on BookTube. It's John over at Must Read More, who's got this seriously wonderful demeanour about himself. And this is the Snobbometer tag. It was actually created by that reading guy. So in both cases, thank you very much. And thank you, John, for the tag. Very kind and gracious of you. It's got 11 questions. First of all, go over and see John's channel. It's fantastic. And he does a lot of these kind of very well thought out answers to tags. I think I'm in alignment predominantly with what he says. So here we go. What is your definition of book snobbery? I think, as words go, it's become black and white, too binary for my likes. So what's food snobbery? That you prefer certain foods? In my case, for years, I had junk food. I would go mad on cheese, beef, meat, pork. And then when I was told by my doctor in my late 40s that, you run the risk of coronary heart disease because one, you're male, two, after 35, you're middle-aged biologically, and it's in your family. So I made a conscious decision to change the kind of foods that I have. Predominantly, was then vegetarian, probably vegan now, for health reasons. And I really have benefited from it. Does that make me a snob? Does that make anybody a snob? I mean, I'll still have a steak occasionally. You only have to look at my videos for more Brune. We was having a bacon and egg pie with apple. And the bacon and eggs is stuff that I wouldn't have now, by choice. But if I was to go into someone's house, they invited me over, and they put a food out like that, I'd eat it, and I'd enjoy it. I wouldn't make an issue of it. But by my own personal choice, I would opt for vegan. Now, for some, that's snobbery. Fair enough, I'm a snob. I've also heard people say that if you hold standards, that's snobbery. Could be. And it could be in literature. So you can interpret it two ways. You could say book snobbery is good. That you want to read the classics, the highly rated. I think in the past I did a video talking about the Lindy effect. Reading books as much as possible that have been talked about for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because they're going to be talked about hundreds of thousands of years in the future. But I myself am an author. Just completed my third book. And, okay, the first two are niche. Somebody could read them and say, oh, it's elitist. Okay, fair enough. The nature of the subject is very niche. It tried to use language as much as possible of the era. That could be snobbery. So there's two ways to look at it. You're either trying to be pretentious or you're setting standards. And I guess that is not so much on how you see it, it's how others see what you're doing. But I don't see it as a black and white thing. I think it's a phrase, like everything, that could be seen two-sided, and really, it's what's it matter? A book is a book. Yeah, interesting question. You could do a whole 10-hour program on it, and I don't think I'd come to an answer. So I'm going to move on. Question 2, is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading? Such as, would you ever read a romance? Or if you regularly read romance, would you ever try a science fiction novel? Okay, bit of a jump there. The first word that stands out there is genre. And I think I've talked about this before. And again, I'm going to sound possibly elitist or snobbish. I personally don't care for the term genre. Well, it's ancient. Aristotle talked about the types of literature that you can have, poetics and writings and whatever. So it's been with humankind, for as long as we've been around of thinking about it. But genre is a modern concept when it comes to books. And I have no problem if you want to read certain things in certain genres. So I'm just going to reach what's at hand. This is a particular genre, often derided by some. But it's just a story. It just happens to be done in a graphic novel way. In the past, and I have done this, I used to deride books like this. It's Reader's Digest. I would never have picked up this. The reason this got my attention was in a thrift shop. There's only 3 stories in here, or 3 specific things, but this caught my attention. And it's fantastic. Absolutely wonderful. I think I went off track there. This might happen a lot in this video. Are there certain books that I would not read? Not now. I've always been into science fiction, science fantasy. And this was because Grammaticus talked about it. Never read it. Got it in a thrift shop. Serendipity happened to be there. $4 for that. And I'm reading the first one, 9 Princes in Amber. Well, I have a long history with science fantasy. Found this one as well that I read in the 80s. There's no genre that I would ignore, but I don't like the term genre. And I think I need to talk about it from music. When I grew up in the 70s, especially in Britain and the 80s, the top of the pops, the charts, had a full range of different types of music. And often family-type songs could get to number 1. Agadoo and René Renata in the early 80s, which now you never get anywhere. And there was, then you'd get Rainbow and AC/DC riding high in the charts, right next to someone like Madonna, who then will be right next door to someone who's doing like a one-off comedy song. Videos became very much the norm, and MTV came along. But MTV, being TV, has to be very careful with the amount of time, and it can only select certain videos. And at first, everything was on there. But then they started getting channels specifically devoted to various genres. So there'd be rock, and then there'd be pop, then there'd be hip-hop. And over time, people who have been born and grown up only knowing that, I think have come to see music as, well, hip-hop must be this. Otherwise, it's going to be that. And there was this demarcation that's become quite rigid. If you want to, or you wanted to have a hit record, you had to go along with the conventions of what MTV said was worthy to go on its channels. There was no crossover. And that, I think, could happen with books. So, this was pure fantasy. If I remember, there isn't any romance in here. But now it's romantasy. It's starting to blend those 2 walls that divided. Well, it used to be in the past, a book is a book. This, considered potentially one of the greatest books ever written. The question to ask is, if this was printed now, if this had never been written, but it came out now, what genre would it fit in with? So I'm randomly taking some books. The Fall, what genre would that be now if it had never been written and it just came out? Gulliver's Travels, children's book? Fantasy? In the past, a book was just a book. What would that be? So, I think when it comes to genre, I don't think it helps. I like to see a book on its own merits. And if it blends genres, fantastic. That's what we should be doing. We should be innovative and creative. Otherwise, it's just rinse and repeat. And although that's great, it's whatever rocks your boat, I personally have a problem with genre. And a problem is too strong a word. I'm cautious. What's the other part of the question? What kind of book would you never consider reading? Well, I never thought I'd read this. Really enjoying it. I'm close to doing the first of 3 on this book, because there's 3 volumes. So I'm at the ball at Netherfield. Mr. Collins and Elizabeth being slightly perturbed in the way her family is coming across. Sister Mary singing. Oh, give someone else the opportunity. It's really good. And I guess I've got to that point, and this is where BookTube has helped. It's made me consider confronting books that up until recently I probably shied away from. So to answer, is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading? Yes, but not now. In the past, yeah. 3, does erotica count as literature? And John, when he did his answer, was quite right. Define erotica. He's going to read something out. For those in the know, you'll know where this comes from as soon as I start reading. How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O prince's daughter! The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a cunning workman. Thy navel is like a round goblet, which wanteth not liquor. Thy belly is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy 2 breasts are like 2 young roes that are twins. Thy neck is as a tower of ivory, thine eyes like the fish pools in Eshbon, by the gate of Bathrimmon. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon, which looketh towards Damascus. Is that erotic? Because it's in the Bible. Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon. Some of the most ancient works are what we would now falsely call erotic. And you only have to read Sappho's literature to know that. And of course you've got the Kama Sutra. Now they're all considered classics. I think we run the risk of over-embellishing erotic when it's not necessarily this so. A lot of it could be double entendre, but whatever. But it counts as literature, absolutely. 4, is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? Well, a classic book can be a popular bestseller, and often is. I'm about to do an episode on this, Plato. And it's the one after the trial of Socrates, Crito, where he's having a conversation with Crito, who's saying, look, Socrates, you can run off, why don't you? And then it's Socrates making his defense that he must suffer because he wants to withhold the laws. There you go. Still popular. Sells hundreds of thousands. This one is perennially a favourite. In fact, the film's coming out this year. So popular bestsellers can be classic books. It's interesting that there's a definition here between read classic books and popular bestsellers as though they're different. They're not. They're the same. And I wonder if a lot of it is to do with perceptions from the English world, because in the Spanish world, this has never not been popular. So I did this recently, The Pirate Queen, The Legend of Grace O'Malley. Mary McAleese, who was the last but one Irish president, said of her in a foreword to a biography, Grace O'Malley's story can in the end make us smile, knowing that for women and for civilization, the best is yet to come if we follow her star. That's a classic, and it's still very popular, specifically within the English language world, but also outside in the Irish world. So the bestsellers have never gone out of circulation. 5. Have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? No, that would be too hard to do. It certainly won't make me sound smart. No, I don't think I've ever bragged about reading a classic. Not out loud. In my own head, I felt proud for having gone through something that was, at the time, I thought was quite difficult. A lot of early philosophy, or my early days of getting into philosophy, I found it quite difficult, especially Aristotle and beyond, the Neoplatonists that I found. German idealism I find very difficult at times. I've not bragged about it, but I've been glad that I've done it. No, I've never done that. 6. Do audiobooks count as reading? What about comic books or graphic novels? I think there's 3 separate things there. So, audiobooks. I used to work for an organisation that helped adults who had late onset blindness. and audiobooks was all that they could read or listen to. So when we read, what are you doing? You're taking in imagery that you have to then, in your brain, make sense of. Well, it's the same coming through the ears. Is going to see Shakespeare the equivalent of an audiobook? They're doing the play. We can read the play. Is one better than the other? I don't think so. So audiobooks do count as reading. Reading isn't just with the eyes. Braille is reading, and that's with the fingers. So yes, they do count as reading. But then it's talking about comic books. I don't know if there is that audiobooks for comic books or graphic novels? If they are, then that's the same. But if it's graphic novels, I think I've already made the point. This is a graphic novel. That's reading. You've still got text, and you've still got ideas to get your head round. So yeah, absolutely they are reading. Just as valid, just as important. 7. Have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book? A book with little substance to it, for example, a self-help book or celebrity memoir? I'll go backwards on this one. One of the best experiences of reading that I've had are the memoirs of Churchill during World War II. And I know John, I Must Read More, has recently read it as well, or starting to read it. Churchill was a fantastic writer, there's no doubt about it. Why would anyone look down on that? I mean, he's historically important. He was a world statesman, well known to history. He was voted Britain's best human being in history. He had flaws, of course, everyone does. A self-help book? Absolutely not. If anything could make your life better, who's to say it should not be read? Well, a snob, obviously. A book with little substance to it. I remember having a conversation with a person whose name I can't remember. I can remember the conversation, I don't remember who they are. And we had a conversation about books on a ship I served on. I think it was the Brazen. And he didn't quite get books. And one that I was reading at the time. This was sent to me by my old naval mate, Steve, thank you. Swiss Family Robinson. He said, well, there's nothing in it. Nothing happens in it. It's just boring. Now, if you look at the picture, that's from a film. Good enough that someone commissioned it to be made into a film. And it's survivors of a shipwreck, the Robinson family, about their ingenuity. But this was boring for someone who didn't get it. And they said it's a popular fluff book, I guess. I would never call it fluff book. A book with little substance to it. Well, the telephone directory has substance to it because it's got facts in there and there's details and there's things that you will find out. And this is the exact same. Every book that's ever been written and put out there, it's easier to pull down than it is to build up. And once you pull down something, and believe me, I've been there, I've done it in the past. You pull down something, what's that do? Does that make you feel better? We see the world reflected what's inside ourselves. So if you deficit theorize, if you are negative, the world's going to be negative and you're going to see all bad things in the world. And that's not to say there aren't bad things. There are bad things. But focus on what's good. Make you feel happier, that's for sure. So if you deride books because you don't get them, and unfortunately, it amazes me how many people who are on BookTube don't get short stories. It's got nothing to do with the length. It's like life. It's not how many years are in your life. It's how much life is in your years. It's not how much our length of something. It's got nothing to do with how many pages. You could have 10,000 pages and it will only teach you one thing. You could have one page and it could teach you 1,000 things. And that's the benefit of old stories, because they are like that. They make you think. Well, everything will make you think. Whatever you may perceive it as, whether it's worthy, whatever score you may give it, which is a subjective thing, it's a value judgment. There was a guy who survived the concentration camps in World War II. He was a Dutchman called Peter Geel. He survived because he wanted to write a story about Napoleon. Not Napoleon the man and what happened to him, but how the French has seen him over time. How he was loathed before he became emperor, revered when he had success. The Bourbons, when they came back to the throne, derided him, and then he came back into favour, then out of favour, and back into favour. If you go back to, say, a random year of 1849, when he's no longer in favour, and said, that's the prevailing thought about Napoleon, it was no good, then that's a value judgment based on then. So if you rank a book as saying, oh, well, I'll only give it 1 out of 5, well, you may change your mind in the future if you have to reread it, because we do change, we do alter. You may pick up on things. Years ago, I'll go back to this one since I've got it. Actually, this one. I'm going to talk about this. A Corner of a Foreign Field, which is men and women writing poetry, that wonderful flowering of poetry in World War One. I never got them when I was a child. If I'd have done my review of, say, my early 20s, 1 out of 10, no good. I'd be embarrassed by that now, because I read this either because I've matured or I've come to appreciate poetry more. I've learnt more about the history, what these men and women went through. It makes sense. I would give it a far higher, more substantive ranking, although I won't because I don't rank, for the reason I just stated. It's a value judgment. For someone to look down on what's called fluff with little substance, I think it reflects more on them than it does on the writing. And if nothing else, let's praise the person for having a go at writing, even if you don't like it. The author succeeded because they tried. Would we rather them that they didn't? And I'm not talking about Hitler's Mein Kampf or Mao's Little Red Book or whatever. We should praise people for having a go, even though we don't get it. Because we don't get certain things like, if you like baseball, you may not like cricket. If you like cricket, you may not like baseball. But if you say both of them you appreciate because they're people showing the endeavour of human spirit and the physicality and how we can have enjoyment. And it gives enjoyment to others. And just leave it at that. 8. Have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? Constantly, but not necessarily in books. I'm currently playing and absolutely loving Matthew 3 on Steam. When it first came out back in 2015, I struggled with it. But now I'm really enjoying it. And there's this one quote from a guy called Donovan, who's white, and he's talking to Lincoln Clay, who is black. And they're trying to get some intelligence on one character, who's Haitian. And Lincoln says about Donovan, who is an expert in intelligence, military intelligence, said, what? Donovan not knowing the whereabouts of this person. And Donovan turns around and said, can I help it if I'm pigmentally challenged? Because he's white. That's a wonderful thing. Because it's like saying, can I help it if I talk this way? Because my accent has received snobbery online as being a crazy accent. If you're not British, potentially it would be. So the words, the way I speak, yeah, I've received snobbery from that. I think we all have, especially when you're growing up. I've also received snobbery because trying to be positive. In this world, that doesn't always go down well with people, unfortunately. However, I think we're talking about books. No, I've never received that through books. 9. Would you ever be friends with a snob? Maybe you already are. Again, snob. Is it good? Is it bad? Why couldn't you be friends with a snob if you consider it bad? Mark Twain, he said, if there's somebody over there you don't like, that's the person you need to get to know. It's got nothing to do with snobbery. Yes, I would be friends. Because I don't see them as snobs. I see them as human beings. Are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? I've known professors who read a lot, and I wouldn't call them sophisticated. One of the wisest persons I've ever known was a janitor who could hardly read. I don't think reading should have an effect on you as a person. What makes a person? Is it their skin colour? Is it their gender? If it's the skin colour, then we'll never come to what a person is, because we're all different. We're all different, which is why we're all the same. It can't be your gender, because there's half the planet then would not be people if it's based on a gender. It can't be age, because tomorrow you're going to be older than you are now. It's got nothing to do with your age. So it can't be your language, because which language we're talking about is superior. English is not the most widely spoken language in the world, so it can't be language. No. So therefore it can't be reading. Reading helps. It will introduce you to the command of language. It will introduce you to ideas. Wittgenstein reckoned that the more language you have, the deeper thinking you can have. Deep thinking doesn't mean that you're open-minded. It doesn't mean that you're going to step away from epistemic vice into epistemic virtue. Epistemology, the way we learn. Vice is closed-minded, not curious, and not willing to engage in a narrative that's not your own. I've known people very highly educated like that. Virtue is open-minded because the mind is like a parachute, only works when it's open. They're curious and they will engage with others. And I've known people very ill-educated who are very much in that realm. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about the guards. Because he said if you speak to a survivor of the Holocaust, one question must be, what did you think of the guards? And he said there were some nice guards, but they were mainly chosen, handpicked, because they were sadists. You can't brushstroke everybody as being the same. You can't say all camp guards were awful. And you can't say all prisoners were great, because they weren't. Some of the worst prisoners were capos, who had been given the responsibility to pretty much put in fear everyone below them because they wanted to survive. So people who don't read, they're not less sophisticated than people who do. It's got nothing to do with that. So no, I don't think that is the case. 11. Measure yourself based on your answers to the previous 10 questions. Would you qualify as a book snob? Yes and no, because it doesn't mean anything. If I choose to read Shakespeare, which I'm looking at here, it's just a big... Oh, let me get it out. I said to myself that if I'm going to talk about a book, I'll always show the physical. Right. Enjoying Shakespeare. Does it make me a snob? If that's the case, then am I not a snob? Chalk and cheese. And in fact, this is a Shakespearean and Greek tragedy than any Shakespearean or Greek tragedy. It's amazing. I think it was... Oh, what's his name now? Gandalf. Ian McKellen. Now, we know him as a great Shakespearean actor. In fact, there are videos on YouTube which was made of him as a young man in the late 70s, early 80s, doing Shakespeare. I think it was Macbeth. And workshops. He's well known for being one of the great actors. He loves the classics. Shakespeare, Greek tragedy. He was desperate to get into a soap opera called Coronation Street. And he did appear for about a 2-week run. He did about 5-10 episodes. And he was questioned. He said, well, look, you've gone from the sublime of theatre, of Shakespeare, down to Coronation Street. And he said, there's more Greek tragedy in Coronation Street than you would get in most places. Don't deride it or put it down because it's a soap opera. And I think there's a lesson there. He rides in the gods, so to speak. But that doesn't mean you can't come down into the cheap seats and enjoy what you do. So, would I qualify as a snob? Yeah, colour me a snob then. If reading certain books like Plato and Shakespeare makes you a snob, but know that I also appreciate non-greats. I've just pulled a handful of books. Tell me if I'm a snob. So, The Day of the Triffids, John Wyndham. The Communist Manifesto. Clockwork Orange. Moloko. The Dharma Bums. Casino Royale. Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall. Treasure Island. The Jail at Newgate. Snob? Possibly. So, I don't think it matters, but if you call me a snob, thank you very much, I'll claim that and say, yay! And now I've got to tag some people. I'm going to tag people not knowing who I'm tagging, so that will come in a moment. So thank you, John. A wonderful tag, and thank you, that reading guy. So absolutely brilliant. So thank you if you got this far. Thank you for listening. Ta-ta for now. No, oh well. Ta-ta for now.